Hello, welcome back to part 2. We're continuing our discussion of using the IRC, and in part 2 we're going to talk about getting around in the International Residential Code. We will start defining the different sections within so that you will know where to look for something. For example, you should just know if you have a question about a masonry chimney, you need to be in chapter 10. That's where you need to be. And we want to help you get that understanding. So let's look at the different parts of the IRC. It begins with a table of contents, which is good information. Part 1 is the administrative section. And that's chapter 1. Part 2 is definitions, and that's an important part of the code. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that makes up chapter 2 is definitions. Part 3 is building, planning, and construction, and that's chapter 3 through 10. And notice that part 1, 2, and 3 are also called R sections. That stands for residential. Those are your base residential requirements. Part 4 is the N section for energy, and that includes just chapter 11. Chapter 11 is all about energy conservation. Part 5 is the mechanical section, and the section numbers start with an M to designate the mechanical, and this includes chapters 12 through 23. And it's basically a rewrite of the International Mechanical Code, but the difference is they take just the sections that apply to residential construction. Okay. Part 6 is the G section for gas, and it's basically a rewrite of the International Fuel Gas Code, but again, with the requirements specifically for residential. For example, with gas pipe sizing tables, I think the longest length in that section is maybe 200 feet, where if you look in the International Fuel Gas Code, which is applicable for commercial stuff, you'll find gas piping lengths up to at least 1,000 feet, maybe even 2,000 feet. But much longer pipe lengths, things you wouldn't find in a typical residential home. Okay. Part 7 is the P section for plumbing. It includes chapters 25 through 33 on plumbing, basically a rewrite of the IPC or the International Plumbing Code. Part 8 or chapters 34 through 43 is the electrical section. Part 9 is a list of all of the reference standards. And then there is an appendix. Keep in mind that appendix information is non-mandatory text. It's basically information that will help you understand the requirements of the code, but there cannot be any mandatory requirements within the appendix. Okay, so let's look at the part and chapter numbering. Okay, the main section numbers are a letter followed by either a 3 or 4 digit number. Okay, for example, R for residential, N for energy, M for mechanical, G for gas, P for plumbing, and E for electrical. And then if it's a 3-digit number, and these are 3 digits before the period, that's chapter 1 through 9. If it's a 4-digit number, that's chapters 10 through 44. Okay. So, for example, R801. That we know the R tells us it's in the residential section, and it's the first section, the 01 section of chapter 8, which is roof ceiling construction. R1001 is the first section within chapter 10, chimneys and fireplaces. Okay? So, and then we get into section numbering. The last two numbers before the period are the section numbers. Chapter 10 is broken into 6 sections, and for example, section R1002 is the second section in chapter 10. In the sections of chapter 10, you can see R1001 is masonry fireplaces, R1002 is masonry heaters, 1003 is masonry chimneys, 1004 is factory-built fireplaces, 1005 is factory-built chimneys, and 1006 is exterior air supplies for fireplaces. And then we get into the subsection numbering, okay? And these are numbers following the period, okay? The first number following the period is the subsection. For example, R1003.9 is the 9th subsection in section R1003. For example, R1003.9 is termination. And then they can be even further divided. For example, R1003.9.1 is chimney caps. R1003.9.2 is spark arresters. Okay. So that's how the section numbers roll within the IRC. So now let's look at using the code a bit. When you get into, particularly if you're going to take the CSIA exam, how to get around in the code. And in the back of the book, there is an index. The index is a fairly detailed listing of all of the subjects in the book. The index is your friend, particularly if you're going to be taking your exam with the paper copy. With the paper copy, you need to know that index. You need to be familiar with it, okay? And then also at the beginning of the code, you have the table of contents. The table of contents is not as detailed as the index, but it's still useful. And then you want to be just generally familiar with the layout of the IRC. So let's look at some of the chapters you want to know about. Chapter 2 is definitions. Chapter 10 is chimneys and fireplaces. Think masonry, but it also does include, it includes masonry fireplaces and factory-built fireplaces. So it's really, chapter 10 is masonry chimneys and factory-built, it's masonry chimneys, and it's all types of fireplaces, whether it's masonry fireplace or a factory-built fireplace. And then chapter 13 are general mechanical requirements. Chapter 14 is heating and cooling equipment and appliances. Chapter 15 is exhaust systems, which includes dryer vent requirements if you're doing any dryer vent work. Chapter 17 are the combustion air requirements. Keep in mind, providing proper combustion air for appliances is important. Chapter 18 is chimneys and vents. Think factory-built systems here. Factory-built chimneys like Duravent or metal Bestis chimneys are covered by Chapter 18. And then Chapter 24 are the fuel gas code requirements for doing any type of gas work, whether it's venting, installation of gas appliances, or gas piping. Okay. Chapter 2 is definitions, and is possibly the most important chapter in the code because the definitions make sure we're all talking about the same thing. For example, in Chapter 24, you'll see a requirement that says gas shutoff valves shall be accessible. Well, what does that mean? Okay, if you look in the definitions, there's a definition for accessible, and it signifies access that may require the movement of an access panel or similar removable obstruction. So what they're saying is the gas shutoff valve, it might be behind a little movable door or panel, or it might be out in the open. Okay. Chapter 10 includes 6 major sections: masonry fireplaces, masonry heaters, masonry chimneys, factory-built fireplaces, factory-built chimneys, and exterior air supply. And then Chapter 13 are the general mechanical requirements, things like approval, listing, and labeling of appliances, clearance requirements and clearance reduction systems, and general installation requirements. Keep in mind, in Chapter 13, there's a requirement that says appliances shall be listed. Okay, that's a requirement in the IRC. So if you're not looking at those general requirements and you go install an unlisted appliance for somebody, the building official is well within his rights to tell you, no, that's not a proper installation. It has to be a listed appliance. So make sure you're looking at all of the areas that pertain to your installation. Chapter 4 has the requirements for various types of appliances, including room heaters, fireplace stoves, and masonry heaters. Chapter 15 is exhaust systems, and of importance to us are the closed dryer exhaust requirements. Worth noting is a new requirement in the IRC that caught a lot of people off guard. And for years and years, the standard has been do not put screws or rivets in dryer vent connections. Now, the code has been updated to say that the joints in dryer exhaust vents need to be mechanically fastened, but those fasteners cannot penetrate the duct more than 1/8 of an inch. You know, if you've got a duct wall and a screw coming a long way through there, that screw becomes, you know, a place where lint and debris catches and starts building. And once it starts building, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, I'm still not convinced this requirement is a good idea, but it is what's in the code currently. We'll have to see how things shake out in terms of, you know, the vent getting dirty. Chapter 17 are combustion air requirements, and basically it says that solid fuel appliances will be provided combustion air in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Oil-fired appliances will be provided combustion air in accordance with NFPA 31, and gas-fired appliances will be provided combustion air in accordance with Chapter 24. Chapter 18 is chimneys and vents. 1801 are the general requirements. 1802 are vent components. 1803 is chimney and vent connectors. 1804 is vents. 1805 is masonry and factory-built chimneys. Contains sizing requirements, but then also refers back to Chapter 10 for installation requirements. And then Chapter 24 is all of the fuel gas requirements. If you're doing any type of gas work, gas piping, venting for gas appliances, installation of gas appliances, all of the requirements for that are found in Chapter 24. Okay, so that's given us a brief overview to the layout of the IRC. Now, when you go to take your exam, when you start taking the exam, the most important thing, remember it's an open book exam, so you'll be able to use the code. Probably the toughest part of taking the exam is identifying the subject of the question, okay? Once you've identified the subject of the question, you can look for it in the table of contents. You can look for it in the index. That's really the place to start. But you have to have something to look up, okay? And for example, if there's a question that says crickets for chimneys shall be installed if the chimney is more than blank inches wide, what's the subject of that question? Well, obviously the subject of the question is crickets. It's asking about crickets on a chimney. So that's where we would go in the index. All right. Another tip that you will find useful if you're taking the exam with an open book, with the written copy, is to put some little markers, some little tabs on your book. Here's a link to the index. This one says clearance reduction on this tab. Here's a little tab that says definitions. Here's a tab for masonry chimneys, so I can find those sections quickly. So spend a little bit of time tabbing your book. That will help you get around in the book quicker, get to the information you need a little faster. Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 2, which was just kind of an overview to the layout of the International Residential Code, help you get familiar with it, and prepare you for taking your exam. We've got one more part, and that'll be part 3. We're going to do some sample questions. We're going to actually look at some questions similar to those you might find on your exam, and then we're going to search for the answers using the code book. So, thanks for watching. This is the end of part 2. We'll see you back for part 3. Thank you.